Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside David Corbin. Glad to have you with us to explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution. Those dirty fuels are burning. The earth's whole climate's churning. Clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill. Fossil fuels are cheap. Wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020 vision.
There you go, Dave. Doing well, Matt. Thank you. We spent this past weekend back in Boston. We celebrated my father-in-law who passed away, Dick Terry. But yeah, really great ceremony and just a great weekend to be in Boston. Fall-like weather, and now we're home. But people, I said, well, how'd the memorial go? And I said, my father-in-law was such a great guy. He was easy to memorialize. He was just a really nice person. So
Yeah.
those are the easiest types,
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Glad you were able to be there for that and support his wife and the family there.
I couldn't figure out what to say, but then there's this great line by David Foster Wallace. He tells a story of three fish, because this captures my father-in-law well. There's an older fish and two younger fish, and the older fish swims by the younger fish and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the younger fish keeps swimming, and that's how my father-in-law would talk. "Morning.
Yep.
How's the water?"
Yep.
The younger fish, go by, and one of the younger fish turns to the other and says, "What the hell is water?" Just to, but it's how you ask the questions that kind of make for peace in life, right? Which
Yeah.
is good.
No, that's true. I know you've had a lot of good conversations with him over the years with significant political differences, but always in a very hospitable way. So
I knew he was feeling better when he'd ask questions.
yeah,
Right.
Right.
Why is Trump doing? So anyway, good,
Yeah.
good stuff. Good man. Yep. Rest in peace.
Well, we are recording on Thursday afternoon, as is our usual custom, and of course that means tonight is Game 3, Red Sox, Yankees. Speaking of New England connections,
Right.
And so lots of tension in the air, certainly in our household, a lot of excitement, but a little trepidation as we wade into this. The stakes of a wild card round are usually not super high, but when it's the Yankees, you just can't.
Oh, it's amazing.
You don't want to lose that.
When the Red Sox clinched on Friday, 3 or 4 of Katie's friends came from New York City for the memorial, and I said, "The Red Sox just clinched," and like in good New York fashion, like, "Who are the Red Sox?"
Right.
So, but yeah, it is. It's unreal. And if your household's been like mine the last 2 days, we're on Mountain Time, 4 p.m.
Yeah.
Just 4 to 7, just on pins and needles. So tonight, I think tonight's game is at 6 p.m. our time. So
Yeah.
that'll help out a little bit, but lots of fun. Wow. It's so great. In so many ways, it's so great. So really looking forward to tonight and hoping for the best.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, we are beginning a new series today, and Dave, I'm going to let you introduce it since you were a part of the book that we're going to be working our way through.
Yeah. So 4 years ago, around this time, late September, our mentor, Angelo Codevilla, died in a car accident. That day was really interesting. I think he had gotten up early, headed to Stanford to have his heart checked out. He was now on his third heart, and then, tragically, I think fell asleep at the wheel and died on the way home. And really, after that happened, you saw in a lot of the responses to his passing, he was such an important individual, because when anything ever happened thereafter, you'd be like, what would Angelo say?
Right.
What would Angelo do?
Right.
And because you always knew that you were going to get some really penetrating, keen insight in no holds barred, in which he just got to the point of the matter quickly. And whether or not people took his instruction thereafter was besides the point, because it was just, okay, this is how we ought to respond to X, Y, and Z. So, I remember talking with Dr. Codevilla's son, David, and just saying, like, well, what are we going to do now? And how can we keep his legacy alive? And fortunately, the Claremont Institute and Ryan Williams, they were already working on a project to try to bring together some individuals who knew him well, who had either been students of him like ourselves or others, and kind of to take up, where was he domestically on issues, and where was he in terms of foreign policy. So that led to a conference in Washington, D.C. in May of 2023, in which we gathered and to the publication of this book, Fighting Enemies, Foreign and Domestic: The Legacy of Angelo Codevilla, that was just published, I think, this past Monday. So we had talked a couple weeks ago, knowing the book was coming out. It would be great to go chapter by chapter through the book and just go to the insights that these scholars had about who he was as a person and how those insights apply to our situation today, which I think would be a very Codevillian approach to our present situation. So here we are with chapter one, and looking forward to the next 2 or 3 months kind of going through this book. I've been able to read a couple of the chapters thus far, and really good work done, and I think it really captures his person well.
Yeah, it's a nice volume, and in addition to the 6 chapters on the substance of Dr. Codevilla's thought, it also includes a little bit of personal recollections, some words by his youngest son, which I thought were very well chosen, and so nice tributes.
That was awesome. Yeah, really, it's great. That's great.
So the first chapter is entitled "The Man Who Kept the CIA Up at Night." It's by J. Michael Waller, who is the president of Georgetown Research and also senior strategy analyst for the Center for Security Policy. And so I think, as we start our conversation, the obvious question is raised by the title of the chapter. Why did Dr. Codevilla keep the CIA up at night?
It's a great question. I think the answer is because he knew what they were up to and what they were not up to. Unlike many people who probably feared getting on the wrong side of the CIA, that was not the person of Angelo Codevilla.
Yeah.
And I think he knew enough of the context of American foreign policy history and really kind of the history of any security apparatus not to turn the means, which is the CIA, into the end itself.
Right.
And to ask the question, is the Central Intelligence Agency as a means achieving the ends, the objective of which is keeping American life flourishing, peaceful, given the risks that are out there in the world. And, here I think Codevilla's orientation to the question springs with like an Eisenhower-like confidence. This being President Eisenhower, who, of course, had led the American effort in World War II, knew the apparatus of what he called the military-industrial complex, knew what it could do as a means, but was also willing to call it out if necessary and to warn against it if those means became an end in itself. So real quickly here, I just want to read a couple excerpts from Eisenhower's farewell address. It's real short, but the kind of the basic theme of this address is as follows. A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But now we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. And the key line, in the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. What do you make of that address? Of course, he's delivering this address at the end of his second term in 1961. And how does it work into this question of why Angelo Codevilla kept the CIA up at night?
Well, I think the common theme here is a matter of interest, institutional interest. And it's important for Eisenhower to remind the American people, and who had more credibility on this point than Eisenhower, that bureaucracies have their own interests and develop interests in maintaining the bureaucracy rather than accomplishing the purpose for which the bureaucracy was established. And of course, he was the one who coordinated this vast effort of D-Day, right? I mean, this is still considered the greatest logistical enterprise in military history, to get all the men and munitions in place and trained and maintain the element of surprise and all the rest. I mean, this is perhaps again the greatest military operation certainly in modern history. So he knew the value of organization. He knew the necessity of having all your ducks in a row, but he also knew that that had to be serving an ultimate end, which was beyond the existence and selfish interest of those who were involved in positions of power. And so here we talk about the military industrial complex. You might say Dr. Codevilla would have added the military intelligence industrial complex, because the intelligence agencies like the CIA have their own interests and their own desire to maintain their power, to expand their budget, to expand their influence. And not only do they have that, but they have this ability, because of the nature of their work, to suggest that you probably don't know what you're talking about, right? If you knew all the secret things that we know, then you'd be following our advice. And they have the means of embarrassing presidents and other leaders by strategic leaks of information. And so this is something that, as a tool, as you were saying earlier, Dave, as a means to the end of grand strategy painted by a president and pursued by the military under his leadership, great. But where it has its own institutional interests that it's protecting becomes a real danger to the pursuit of that grand strategy.
Yeah, we're going to get into this over the next couple of weeks. The appreciation that Codevilla had for what I would call the Machiavellian mind, right? Who uses secrecy, deception, subversion, all the rest to achieve an end. Recognizing, right, that some of those things are necessary in war, they're necessary in intelligence, they're necessary in any military operation. But if those instruments of subversion, secrecy, etc., are used in an untruthful manner to the end itself, then what you arrive at is a Machiavellian means to a Machiavellian end,
right?
Which is one's own self-interest, the bureaucracy's self-interest, rather than the interests of the United States. And so this is a continual theme that we'll hit upon, take into account the points that Machiavelli, the master, made. But if you are overwon, if your soul is overwon, if your person is overwon by your allegiance to yourself, rather than that thing that you're working for, your country, then what you end up with is a situation that Codevilla kind of rightly called disaster that had become the CIA by the late 1990s.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting little factoids in the chapter that we're talking about was that Dr. Codevilla did his homework, and that says he was staffer for the Senate Intelligence Committee. That was the context in which he was investigating the CIA. And it says he was probably the only person in the world who read every line of the 2-foot-high CIA budget. And he knew what they were saying, what they weren't saying. Obviously, he was one of the most intelligent people you ever meet. And so he could see what was buried in a budget and what had been left out of a budget, and ask the pointed question that no one wanted to address.
Well, we know this well, Matt. We didn't have 2-foot-high dissertations, but we know by how much red ink he spilled, probably more on mine than yours. He went through every line, word by word. Why'd you choose that word? And it's just that attention to detail. And he once told me, right, we're up against, right, this force that we've got to try to defeat, that I think is trying to bring the country down. And Corbin, we're never going to get there if we don't do our homework better than they do, right? So one of the ways to kind of overcome, right, this establishment that thinks so highly of itself is to ask the most important questions, but to really do your homework, to come into any meeting, any conversation, any debate, having outworked your opponent. Here he mentioned William Buckley as well as someone who just did his homework. And if you do your homework at night, the presentation the next day is that much easier.
I think that's an important lesson, honestly, for the Trump movement. Dr. Codeville had many sympathies with the direction that movement wanted to take things and some of the efforts to roll back the excesses of progressivism and all the follies. And but I think he also was concerned about that question: were they willing to do the homework? And obviously, Donald Trump seems to be by nature unwilling to do any homework. But those underneath him, right, who are going to say the right words, perhaps, and maybe even understand why they're saying them, but are they willing to do the homework that's necessary in order to carry out the sort of slog, right, that's necessary to actually implement a policy, right, to carry through on the things that you're saying?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I've appreciated in the second Trump term is that I think that there are more people who are willing to do their homework than before. And there are more people who are actually drawn to the right thing this term than in the first term as well. So I think you have better personnel, but those personnel, as we've noted, they have to do their homework in order for this thing not only to win a electoral victory, but to actually righten the ship. And because that's going to be, as we'll see over the next couple of weeks, that's going to be a 25 to 50 to 75 year conversion back to the old regime, which will take time and doing homework and asking questions and really having those conversations with a lot of different people. One of the groups of people that Codeville loved talking with, because he loved teaching them, were journalists. And he said, just give me an interested or curious journalist that I can share wisdom with, and you can really do wonderful things. So, yeah, I think this is going to be very, very important. And I think what we're saying here too is don't embarrass your cause by being unprepared. Whereas
Right.
a lot of these folks in the CIA, it wasn't don't embarrass your cause by being unprepared. Don't embarrass the Bureau.
Right.
Don't embarrass us.
The
And
agency.
hence
Yeah.
the agency, right? Because if that's what you're worried about, embarrassing the Bureau or the bureaucracy, then what you amount to is a country club, not an organization fit to do the objective you've been given.
Right. And so you end up in a situation where you're risk averse. You're trying to just maintain your budget, maintain your position, maintain your prestige. And because of that, you're not really willing to carry out the president's strategic imperatives, and you're not willing to challenge perhaps conventional wisdom. It's very easy to get into groupthink in these situations, and very difficult to get out of it. And so, yeah, it's not going to be the work of a few executive orders and a couple of speeches to turn this thing around. Those things are necessary, but not sufficient in order to really make some changes.
Yeah, you're susceptible to the way the wind blows. And that was one thing that Codeville always said to me is that, we rightly have respect for those who have served and died, for our country. We rightly have respect, for national security. But these are human beings as well, and they're prone to human tendencies. And oftentimes in the military establishment, that there's often the holding the finger to the wind. Which way is the wind blowing?
Right.
And I think we've seen this kind of in how new progressive idols have been incorporated into how we fight wars, how we organize ourselves domestically, how we organize ourselves within military units, what we think is important and what we think is unimportant in war fighting, which is the objective of many of these agencies in order to keep the peace of our country. I also thought it was interesting, Matt, and just great timing that as we're kind of doing this episode, there's this speech that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth gave this week to
Yeah.
all of the commanding officers and their senior personnel. And when I was like, okay, wow, this is kind of interesting. Let me go ahead and read the speech. And it read like a Codevillian speech. Maybe Michael Anton helped Secretary Pete write this, but
Yeah.
it was very Codevillian. And I think it'd be interesting for us as we're talking about the old boys. Well, how did Hegseth approach the old boys in this speech this week?
I think this is part of a broader question about the Trump administration is, if there's a loss in 2028, there's no legacy. I mean, every corporation that's dropped DEI will be right back at it. Every college that's trying to get on the right side of Trump will be right back at it.
Oh yeah.
Military, people will wait them out. The bureaucracy, people will wait them out. Uh, the whole thing, the whole project really depends on its continuation. I know that's, the whole Flight 93 election thing in 2016. I think from the standpoint of the Trump reversal of things, if you can't string together a few electoral victories, none of it's going to matter. Because think about what happened with two Obama administrations, right? All this stuff gets entrenched. You have the Trump interregnum, as they see it, and massive resistance. And then you get Biden for 4 years. And so essentially you got 16 years of either active or passive aggression on these points. And so now you've got really your first effort to roll it back. And we've got, 3 years until the next election. And so again, people can wait them out, right? If there's not serious follow through and a serious effort to institutionalize, and that's going to have to go beyond the executive branch. That's got to involve the Congress and legislation. And there's going to have to be things beyond just executive orders that can all be undone, January 20th, 2029, assuming you have a Democrat who's elected in that previous election. So, I mean, there's a lot at stake here in terms of this project. And so President Trump needs to be prudent. If he wants to have this kind of legacy, he's got to guard some popularity, right, and be wise in how he carries himself these next 3 years to set up J.D. Vance or whoever his successor or would-be successor is going to be in order to have some of these things actually last.
Agreed. Because as we mentioned in our last episode, at the end of covering our book from 2010, it's not a situation where we're keeping the Republic anymore. We're restoring the Republic. And any restoration takes time. It takes building a good foundation, making sure it doesn't have cracks, all of the education that goes into building the regime back up. And much like the homework that Codevilla does, that's hard work. And that's work that it's about creating a culture and paideia. And you need to be careful in how you do that. And it's almost as if we're dealing with a moment in time where I think a lot of us have more hope now than we did 20 years ago. But we have to tend to this project much like we would tend to the education of our 10 or 12-year-old child. We really need to pour into it everything, those kind of bits of wisdom from the ground up, so that maybe we can restore this republic.
Trump's going to have to get serious about that, right? Is his goal here to even scores from what he considers to be real or perhaps imagined, in some cases, slights and offenses of others? Is that the goal? Is it to throw his weight around and assert his power as some kind of American despot? Or is it actually to do some work of restoration? And I think, he's tugged in multiple directions on this. And to the degree that he decides he really wants to make sure he settles all the scores, he's going to, I think, undermine his ability to actually accomplish the things that would be of more lasting value for the regime.
Well, Hegseth's speech was, I love the speech. Like I said, I think it was the Codevillian speech. Let me read a couple lines from it. He begins, right, the names are important. What you call something is important. So from this moment forward, the only mission of the newly restored, we're talking about restoration, the newly restored Department of War is this: war fighting, preparing for war, and preparing to win, unrelenting and uncompromising in that pursuit, not because we want war. This is so important. This is Codevilla. Right? No one here wants war, but it's because we love peace. We love peace for our fellow citizens. They deserve peace, and they rightly expect us to deliver. And going back to this means and ends things again, Matt, war is a means. It's not an end in itself, right? It's a means to peace. And if you think about it in those terms, you're not scared to call it what it is. You rightly identify it for what it is, knowing that it leads to something good.
Right. That's just the classic Aristotelian logic that Dr. Codevilla brought to so much of his analysis of politics.
So what is that going to amount to? And this is where I think Hegseth gets it right. This speech today, as I drink my coffee, this speech today is about people, and it's about culture. The topic today is about the nature of ourselves. This is great because no plan, no program, no reform, no formation will ultimately succeed unless we have the right people and the right culture at the War Department.
Yeah, undoubtedly the case. And I think this is one of the things that we see consistently over the course of presidential administrations. If the people aren't in the right places, who have the right ideas and willing to do the homework, like you were saying, and make the effort, then you will not succeed. And there has to be a culture that's set by the president, working his way down through cabinet officers, and has to be consistently applied. And people have to see that that culture is real, that that culture is being established in a way that can last, and then some will embrace it and some will bend to it. But either way, it begins to drive the activity of the department.
The character of nations is about the character of those who lead nations, right, and those who are led within the nation,
Right.
right? That this is the nub of it all, right? That and here Hegseth says, well, and what's been leading this department for so many years? He writes, he says, for too long, we promoted too many uniformed leaders for the wrong reasons, based on their race, based on gender quotas, based on historic so-called firsts. We pretended that combat arms and non-combat arms are the same thing. We've weeded out so-called toxic leaders under the guise of double-blind psychology assessments, promoting the risk-averse go along to get along conformists instead. You name it, the department did it. And here I stop and I'm like, the group of 800 people that he's talking to, this has been what they've grown up in. They've climbed this ladder and they rubber stamped all of these things. So I'm wondering, as he's giving this speech, right, it's really an indictment against the people in this audience and others who have just retired recently.
Yeah.
How well are they going to take it?
I mean, this is 800 senior officers and gathered from throughout the world. I mean, really a remarkable gathering. But you're right. These are people that either have implemented these policies or perhaps been the beneficiaries of these policies. Now, maybe not to a man, but this is the general culture in that room. And maybe we're not surprised that some of the reaction from the unnamed sources that spoke to reporters afterward was not so favorable.
Yeah, I just, but I think that my favorite paragraph of the whole speech is the one I'm about to relay because it has within it what we just talked about over the last 3 months, the principle of equality, the principle of responsibility, the principle of honor, of justice, of lawfulness, and of prudence. All of those 6 principles are bound up into this one paragraph. The new War Department's golden rule is this: do unto your unit as you would have done unto your own child's unit. Would you want him serving with fat or unfit or undertrained troops, or alongside people who can't meet basic standards, or in a unit where standards were lowered so certain types of troops could make it in a unit where leaders were promoted for reasons other than merit, performance, and warfighting? The answer is not just no, it's hell no. You see how those principles are connected here. You wouldn't do unto your son, you wouldn't want your son or daughter in a fighting force that had to play by the rules of the last 40, 50 years. You'd be leading them to their death. And if you don't care enough about the troops that you lead, that you put them under these rules that are not worthy of warfighting, then that's basically what you've done. You've sacrificed them to a progressive idol that has nothing to do with why they enlisted in the first place.
Yeah, the underlying assumption is we can get by with one hand tied behind our back, either because of our technological advantages or we're just not going to have the wars that we used to fight. We don't have to maximize our fighting capacity. We can do some other things. And I think another analogy here that you come to mind, well, okay, is that how you want medical schools to approach things, right? Do you want the surgeon that's working on your triple bypass, do you want that to be the best surgeon in terms of technical competency, or do you want them to have checked some boxes on the way to that position? And so when life and death matters are on the line, all of a sudden we kind of sober up on these things and we say, oh, okay, yeah, that one, I think we need the best person. I don't think I have the bandwidth to allow for other cultural questions to come into it.
My pilot kind of knows how to fly.
Right.
Maybe not, right? Just
Right.
you got to go. My lawyer kind of knows the law. You go through every one of these fields, right? These leading institutions of the country. Do you really want someone who hasn't merited, where they are? Someone with a law degree who doesn't know how to write a complete sentence? Are those things that you want when you're being represented or operated on by these people? No, heck no.
Yeah. So, as I said just a moment ago, the reaction wasn't super favorable. So you go to some of these interesting former senior defense officials and such, who are not going to be on the record, but are in the Rolodex of all the right reporters. So here's a couple of lines from a few of the reactions. One says, "It's a waste of time for a lot of people who emphatically had better things they could and should be doing." Another person says, "Could have been an email." Right. And of course, we know what would happen to that email, right?
Would have
Quick
been
delete,
deleted.
right? And on we go with more important things. So yeah, I think, it's not surprising that the reaction, at least from those that went on the record without their names so bravely, that they're not favorable to all this, but it does suggest that Hegseth's onto something, right? That there's a cultural problem that needs to be corrected, and it may not be one that's easily corrected with the people that were in that room. It may be that it's the next generation, the rising generals and admirals, rather than those that are actually in those ranks and positions right now, that are going to have to be looked to provide the leadership that returns American military back to its fundamental purposes.
Yeah, I think the key line from the New York Times Pentagon correspondent, her name's Helene Cooper, reporting to MSNBC, she said, "I've yet to find a single military official who was in the audience today who thought that this was a good presentation."
There you go.
Now, the question is that true? Is it partially true? I'm sure there's some truth to it. But the truth to that sentence, that statement, really relays back to this idea that this is going to take time, right? And if the people in that audience don't have the right character so that they thought that that was a good presentation, then we need new people. We need new senior officials, et cetera. And by the way, and I think you mentioned this too as we were preparing for the show, this is probably a speech that troops would love. Great, awesome. You
Yeah.
care about us? That's good. And we get to do our job without one hand being tied behind our back, all the better. But I'm bringing this back, Matt, to Michael Waller's chapter. It shows you how much language has been weaponized, how much the senior officials in doing the activities of subversion have been subverted themselves, and ask the question whether or not they have the right character to be able to do the job well, which is what Codevilla was arguing about as he was assessing the capacity of the CIA and other agencies in his time in government.
Yeah, I mean that's really the question that he was always wanting to drive you back to, right? Right? You open the show with means and ends. Okay, tell me how what you're doing will help us to accomplish our ultimate goals. Is the CIA, as presently constructed, designed to do that? Is the military organized to do that? Are the goals, the things you're boasting about, the press releases, right? Are the press releases about the latest accomplishment, the latest success in securing victory over enemies, and thereby strengthening the peace of the American people? Or are we noting, hey, it's our first person of this various who checks these 7 boxes to have done a certain thing? Is that what we're bragging about? Is that how we measure success? Or are we trying to accomplish what's meant to be the purpose of the Department of War or Defense, namely the security of the American people and the protection of their rights?
Yeah, and I think here I want to draw everyone's attention, and I would say, please, everyone, buy this book, Fighting Enemies, Foreign and Domestic, The Legacy of Angelo Codevilla by Encounter Books. But on page 15, on this point, Waller kind of, I think, sums up his argument as to what is needed now, given the present crisis that we're in, taking into account the Hegseth speech and the reaction to it. Waller writes, "Government bureaucracies are just bureaucracies. When they atrophy and abuse the public trust, they should be abolished. In an orderly way, their essential functions can be transferred to another bureaucracy that can do the job, or better yet, they can be culled to create a new bureaucracy to last for as long as it faithfully executes its intended purpose. Later on in that same section, he argues replacements would have to be designed according to the priorities of America's mission in the world, which Codevilla saw, as driven by the American people's priorities for the central government to serve them with their consent as the governed, and not for the ruling class to serve itself. And I think that's kind of really that's the crux that we're in. Are we going to have agencies where the ruling class serves itself, or they serve the American people? And if they're serving themselves, they need to be replaced.
Yeah, which is a difficult project, as we're saying, a long-term project, and it's one that is only temporary, right? A victory there is a temporary victory. You establish a new bureaucracy that fixes the old one until that one starts to become corrupt. I mean, this is the nature of human things, right? They're fallen, and it's only so long before the corruption keeps in. And so there's this constant vigilance that's required. I think this is one of the lessons, going back to why you're reading every line of a 2-foot high budget. It's because there's that constant vigilance that's required in order to respond to the problems as they arise. And of course, easier to deal with these issues in the early stages than to allow them to grow and to develop. Like any illness or disease, the further along it gets, the more dangerous it becomes. And so there's a real need for those who will be watchful. And Dr. Codevilla was, the paragon of watchfulness when it came to these agencies, whether he was in the government in association with the Intelligence Committee, or when he was out of there, as at Hoover Institute or Boston University or other places, he always had a close eye on these institutions and drew his readers' attention to things that we might easily overlook or not worry about or think are secondary or tertiary when it comes to national defense and protection of the Republic.
And I think a broader question, and maybe where we can conclude this discussion, is in how much we trust experts. And because every one of these individuals in that audience, they're going to say, we're an expert. Hegseth is not an expert. He doesn't know what he's talking about. They're going to be backed by their folks in the mainstream media that the experts say. Well, Matt, what's your take on experts in all this conversation?
Well, I mean, we could have a good long conversation about that, but I think one of the things that you're saying, Dave, that's most dangerous about appeals to expertise is just the way that it closes down any kind of real deliberative process and public discussion. I mean, in a republic, we're supposed to be talking about things, we're supposed to be debating things. There's supposed to be an opportunity to challenge assumptions and to push back on claims. And expertise, academic expertise, and we know something about that. We have academic expertise in certain areas, is something thrown around and often abused by those who possess it. And so, for example, you think about when you get some open letter regarding climate change, and you've got a whole bunch of people on there who have PhDs at distinguished universities, and let's say they're in the sciences, broadly speaking, but have no special competency in areas related to climate change. They're not climatologists. They haven't done the research, but they lend their prestige. Make the list longer, right? This is, wow, they're from Harvard. They've got a PhD from Princeton or whatever the case might be. And so it makes a claim that's dishonest. And so I think what we have to do is have some kind of rules for thinking about what's it mean to assert expertise and how much weight should we give to that. And the reality is academic expertise is very narrow. Whether that's good or bad, that's just the reality of it, right? Most folks trained in the academy have a range of expertise that's very, very narrow. It's a small number of questions. And so, you're not just generally competent in biology. You're competent in one small slice of biology. And if that's not the one we're talking about, you're not an expert anymore. You may be smart. You may be well educated. You may be somebody who can weigh in and knows the kind of questions that are worth asking about the topic, but you're not an expert. And so you shouldn't assert that kind of expertise in a way that closes down conversation. And even if you are an expert in an area, you got to show your work, right? We can't have, again, this kind of Gnosticism where people have kind of claimed a special knowledge that you have no access to. I'm sorry, we'd love to be able to share the ideas with you, but you're not worthy. You're not smart enough. You don't have the background. And so just trust me, because the expert's claim to trust depends upon being trustworthy. And too much expertise is abused in pursuit of political objects that aren't really scholarly objects. You take expertise in this area and you translate it into some political claims that don't really follow from the things that you know and maybe know well in your academic area.
Yeah, I always think back to just the following thought. In 1945, there was no more powerful nation in the world than the United States. There was no more beloved nation in the world than the United States. This isn't to say that Americans were perfect or an exception to the rule of human nature, et cetera. But we were at a point in history where we were predominant and we were viewed as good. We've handed over the rule of the United States to ruling class experts over the last 80 years. How's that gone? How has how has the last 80 years gone on every one of these fronts in terms of our prosperity, in terms of our ingenuity, in terms of the entrepreneurial thrust that got us to where we are, in addition to a love of the laws of nature, right? And if
Yeah.
nature's God, right? Abandoning that and moving to expert rule by the ruling class at these institutions have gotten us to a worse place as a country.
No, that's a great point, and that's kind of a bottom line point. The kind of point that again Dr. Codevilla would love, right? Let's boil it all down. What's the one sentence summary here? Are you getting what you're paying for? Is the CIA working for itself, or is it working for us? Is the FBI working for itself? Is it working for us? Is the military working for itself? Is it working for us? And obviously, those answers are nuanced, right? There's not as maybe a yes or no kind of answer to those questions, but to the degree that there's a compromise there on its mission, that's something that has to be addressed. And it's good that Pete Hegseth and others are trying to do that. And we hope that there will be some lasting consequences of the efforts that they're making.
It's an ironic segue that we now move into Tocqueville's crystal ball, where you and I both know that we are experts at calling every
Right, exactly.
sports
Yeah, well,
event.
we have PhDs, so of course we know sports, right? Doesn't that follow?
Of course.
In the same way that Albert Einstein knew physics, surely he knew about peace and war and those kinds of things, right? Put
It's
it blunt.
true. It's
So,
true.
yeah, no, we ironically make predictions in these areas. It's fun, but it's certainly not something you want to be counting on. Well, I think less said about the Ryder Cup, the better. Kind of a disaster. I guess the respectable showing with the Sunday singles matches that makes the final score not look too bad, but there was really never any chance after day two. The pairs matchups have been so bad for the United States, and we had high hopes for Scotty Scheffler. We're not borne out. He did beat Rory McIlroy one-on-one. That was some, I guess, individual vindication, but lost all four of his matches where he was paired with a fellow American against two of his European opponents. So
We
a
didn't
rough
set it
showing.
up right either, Matt. I mean, we should have done an over under on how many beers would have been spilt on competitors' wives.
Yeah, yeah. That New York crowd didn't have much to cheer for, so they took it out on the European team and their family, which not the prettiest scene there. Yeah, we're going to try to put that behind us as quickly as possible and shift gears. Of course, baseball playoffs, as we've already talked about, are underway, and we haven't made World Series predictions. We do have to say one thing, though, before we get into this. We did make predictions on the Red Sox and Yankees at the beginning of the year, back in March, and we're talking about over and under, and based on the latest numbers there, how the Red Sox and Yankees would do. And you predicted back in March, beginning of March, the Yankees would win 94 games and the Red Sox would win 88 or 89. And you hit both. I mean, out of 162, that is impressive. We've had a few pretty impressive picks over the years, the blind squirrel kind of theory, but that's about as good as we've been. 94 wins to the exactly for the Yankees, 89 for the Red Sox, and I was off a couple. I was low on both, so not horrible either, but to hit them both, that's impressive, Dave.
So I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say I'm going to say the Red Sox are going to win this game tonight.
All right.
Okay, and the it just has to happen now that I had their numbers right for the season.
So who do you have the rest of the way, Dave? World Series champion, American League champion, National League. What do you say?
It could be the bias of immediacy, but just watching the Dodgers the last couple nights, I mean, they've just
Yeah,
looked like the Dodgers.
right.
So if they keep on playing like this, wow, that lineup is incredible. And so I'm going to go with a Dodgers over the Blue Jays in 6 games. I think Toronto's got a really good team that I think can make it through these playoffs. They're only going to have to pitch for 2 rounds, but they've got a well-rounded team. They platoon well. I know Seattle's rough, but I say the Blue Jays pull it off, and then we'll face the Dodgers, but lose to the Dodgers in the series 4 games to 2.
All right, so you're setting us up for heartbreak in the division series. Obviously, if the Red Sox win tonight, they go on to Toronto, and you're saying they're going to lose somewhere in that series. Uh, Understood. I mean, it's not going to be the Cinderella year, I don't think, for the Red Sox. It's been a fun ride, but it's going to end short of a championship, I believe. I've got the Phillies beating the Dodgers in the next round, and then going on to win the World Series over the Mariners. I think the Mariners for the last month or so have been the most dangerous team in the American League. It's challenging going out west. They're going to have the home field advantage over at least some of the teams, at least in the division series, depending on what happens with the ALCS. We'll see. But they're going to be tough, I think. They've got some power now. They've got some strong pitching. They've had that. So I think they get to the World Series, but the Phillies are too strong. Their starting pitching is really great. Of course, they got Harper. They've got Schwarber and some other key hitters, Turner. So I think they put the whole thing together, and the Phillies win a championship.
Well, all right, we'll see.
Josh Flander will be happy.
Fun month. We've got football, baseball, hockey, basketball, you name it. October's the month. So
it's all happening. Yep. That's going to get us to the end of the show for today. We look forward to being back with you in a couple of weeks, and we'll take up our second chapter by Robert Riley, Angelo Codevilla, the Anti-Millenarian. You can follow us on Instagram and on YouTube. You can also reach out to us at democracyinamericatoday@gmail.com, and we'll look forward to talking to you again real soon.
2020 vision.